Conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so let us continue from where we left off last week. Last week we were discussing the decrees that had been made. We also went into a little bit of a sidetrack about how some of those decrees, actually the decree against the study of Torah, reading of Torah, led to our regular Shabbat programming, where we have the Haftorah reading that's done every week. That was done originally in place of the Torah reading that we could not do, and then with a classic Jewish in your face, we're going to actually make that part of what we always do. Okay, let's come back over here. And we saw the Rambam source number 3 last time. Let me just correct this 1 second. There we go. Okay, let's go to number 4. Hello, Alan. The Jewish Study Network, a Chanukah reader. The story behind the events. Source number 4, guys. Everybody got it? We call to order. The story behind the events of Chanukah begins with the Greek conquest of the kingdom of Judea by the military force of Alexander the Great in 320 BCE. We've discussed some of this last week. Not content to be mere military conquerors, the Greeks maintained a vision of conquest that extended beyond just physical subjugation. They wanted their culture to dominate the world, and hence always sought to spread its influence within the territories under their control. Long before the actual events of Chanukah took place, Greek culture, known as Hellenism, started to make itself felt within the Jewish population. We mentioned how as Yaakov was getting ready to meet with Esav, he asked Hashem, save me. He prayed, save me. Miyad achi, miyad Esav, for the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esav. And there were two distinct dangers that Esav posed, and those are two distinct dangers that we, the Jewish people, have dealt with throughout all of this time. And that is the Esav, the harsh pogrom, Holocaust Esav, and also the assimilation of Achi, of my brother, which has also led to so many losses of Jews along the way. So there too, Hellenism started to make itself felt within the Jewish population. As Paul Johnson notes in the History of the Jews, the impact of Hellenization on educated Jews was in many ways similar to the impact of the Enlightenment on the 18th century ghetto. It was a destabilizing force spiritually, and above all, it was a secularizing, materialistic force. In response to Hellenization, internal conflicts soon arose within the Jewish people, as those who favored the new trend confronted those who did not. Eventually, they developed a movement of Jews whose aim it was to force the pace of Hellenization, right? Forced Hellenization by purging Judaism of those elements that limited the advancement of Greek culture, right? You're holding the Jewish back, you're holding people back, and therefore forced Hellenization. In the year 175 BCE, these Jewish Hellenizers gained a powerful ally with the ascendancy of Antiochus IV Epiphanes to the throne of the Syrian Greek Empire. Like those before him, Antiochus was disturbed to find the Jews still holding on to their own religion and God in blatant disregard of the Greek deities. We mentioned last week that upon the death of Alexander the Great, this Greek empire split up into 4 different empires, and this is the group that was this was the individuals and the lineage that was in control of the area above Israel, the Syrian. That's why it's Syrian Greek, right? Syrian Greek have quite a bit of geography between the two of them. But this was the Greek Empire that was ruling, the rulers that were there in what we would call present-day Syria. To further advance the cause of Hellenization, Antiochus issued decrees banning all religious or cultural practices not in line with Hellenism. Particularly, we discussed last week the observance of Brit Milah, right? They were all about the glory, the beauty of the human body. Brit Milah, they view that as a desecration. Shabbat, which is our belief in God as the creator. Rosh Chodesh, we discussed, is our the component that we control the holiness to a degree. We control the calendar. So we control when a holiday will or will not be taking place. Antiochus was a vicious dictator bent on the destruction of Judaism. Women who circumcised their babies were executed with their dead babies hung around their necks. That's from the book of Maccabees. The book of Maccabees speaks about all these events that took place. It is not part of Tanakh. It was not canonized, meaning that it's not considered to have been written with Ruach HaKodesh, with divine inspiration and spirit, right? And therefore it's not part of the canon, right? Also, it took place much later after the close of Nevuah. The close of prophecy took place at the very beginning of the Second Temple, and this is taking place towards the end of the Second Temple. The Second Temple stood for 420 years. This is well after that point. A special directive was also sent to stop the sacrificial service in the temple. The temple itself in 168 BCE was desecrated and turned into a place where non-kosher animals were offered to pagan gods. Again, as we mentioned last week, the idea of shfichat dam. We mentioned that each of the exiles are aligned with one of the cardinal sins. And Greek, that exile of Yavan, which we'll soon see is an unusual exile. It was unusual in that it wasn't an exile, meaning that we were in Israel. We weren't exiled from the land. We were not physically exiled. It was more of a spiritual exile. But Greece and that galut, that exile, is aligned with shvicha dam, which normally is interpreted as murder. And you would say, well, they weren't trying to murder us. They were simply trying to get us to assimilate. But actually, what they wanted was the literal meaning of shvicha dam we mentioned last week. Shvicha dam literally means spilling the blood, meaning they were okay keeping the external beauty, have a beautiful temple, but take away the spirituality. And therefore, they didn't look to destroy the temple, but they looked to drain any life blood from it. Lifeblood meaning the spiritual energy and the spiritual practices of the Beit HaMikdash. Have a Taj Mahal, just not a place where God is worshipped. The Gemara goes forward and tells us about the Chanukah miracle. Source number 5. My Chanukah, the Gemara asks, what is this Chanukah? And the Gemara answers, when the Greeks entered the Heichal, that's the sanctuary, Timu, they defiled kol hashmanim shebeheichal, all of the oil that was there in the Heichal. And when the kingdom of the Chashmonayim became strong, v'natzchum, and defeated them, badku, they searched, v'lo matzu ela pach echad shel shemen, shayemunach b'chotamo shel kohen gadol. They only found one flask of oil that had the stamp of the kohen gadol, certifying that it had not been tampered with, and it was still in a state of purity. There was enough oil there to burn for one day. As we know, Naaseh Bones, a miracle took place. And it then burned for 8 days. Lashana Acheret, the next year, Kivaum, we discussed this last week. The next year, they sensed that this was a portal. This was a stop, a tachana in our spiritual yearly cycle, and that it had returned, that same spiritual energy was back, and they established and made it as days of Yom Tovim with Hallel and Hoda'ah, right, with praise and for thanksgiving. So there was enough oil for one day, and it burned for 8 days. What do they do on day 9? So why was day 9 necessary and not? Why couldn't they do that on day 8, on day 7, day 6, day 5? Whatever they did at day 9, why couldn't they do that on day? Supply chain issues. Speaking about COVID, we're all of us COVID veterans, a supply chain issue. Well, that's actually what it was. And the two explanations that are given is that, first of all, well, one is they need to go through a purification process. And if one is tamei mate, has become tamei through coming in contact, touching, or being involved in funerals, in tending to corpses, to bodies that have died, and preparing them, then one becomes tamei mate. We're all tamei mate. We've all been in hospitals. We've all been in funerals. We're all tamei mate, and that is why, parenthetically, when one goes to Israel, the Rabbanut says, don't go up onto the Temple Mount, because some of those areas of the Temple, of what's the present-day Temple Mount, is what was the courtyard in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, and it still has that kedusha, and therefore a person who is tamei can't go there. And therefore, and simply going to a mikvah doesn't do it. It's a 7-day process involving the red heifer, the ashes of the parah aduma, which we don't have now. And that's why they say many religious people do go up, because they are confident, they know which area on the present day up there, which is actually courtyard, which is not. But in order to make the oil, it was a 7-day purification process, and then they were able to make the oil. Once they were pure, day 9, they were good to go. Another explanation given by the Maharsha is that there were supplies of oil that they could access. It was a 4-day trip away, and therefore travel, come back. So correct, it was a supply chain issue, either in terms of getting it or in terms of producing it. There's another question that can be asked, right? We said over here about 100 since the year 168 BCE, it was desecrated, right? So therefore, why did they need this miracle of the oil? On 2 points. Point number 1, when Rov Kahal, when majority of the congregation is in a state of tumah impurity, then these things can be offered. This service can be done even with tamei items, even with ritually impure items. So without this miracle of finding the oil and lasting 8 days, they could have gone ahead with oil that was tamei. And if you want to say, well, they didn't want to do that, well, it had been decades of unuse. So wait 8 days. Right? So it'll be another 8 days. It had been tens and tens and tens of years plus 8 days. Why do they need this miracle over here?
Gratitude to Hashem for being, having the temple back and being able to rededicate it.
A miracle is not my gratitude to Hashem.
No, but the battle where they were able to retake.
So we had the battle and we regained control. Why did God send this miracle? Unnecessary. We could have waited. We could have gone ahead with tamei. Sasha. I'm sorry. Okay. Because we so much wanted. Nice. What were you about to say?
Acknowledgement. Sometimes we have to have something in front of you to think about, and we have to be grateful.
Okay. Right. So this was a way for something more tangible. We'll come back to that in a second. So what Sasha's saying, I like, is that, well, the way I like to put it, this was a heavenly hug. This was Hashem seeing our want, our alacrity to do it. So then Hashem sent us this heavenly hug to let us know, with all that's happened, all that's going on, I'm right here with you. So mentioned, I think I put in the newsletter this week, the beautiful thing, Rabbi Schwab, the last pasuk of Shema, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I'm Hashem your God, who took you out from the land of Egypt to be for you a God. I am Hashem your God. Why the repetition? I am Hashem your God during the time of the sound and light shows, of the miracles and the wonders. I am Hashem your God, even when all that's not going on in the world. But nothing is in the closeness and in the relationship. So this was showing us, this was giving us this divine hug. And just to come back to what Yosef had said, another explanation that's given is that if it had just been the miracle of the battle, so people would say, oh yeah, it was incredible strategy. Wow, the strategists, those Jewish strategists, right? People could always cut God out of the equation, right? Reader's Digest, I remember reading years ago, had a whole thing about how the 10 plagues, well, there was this and that caused the algae to bloom, was red algae, and that caused the frogs, right? By Yamsuf, actually, God does this. By Yamsuf, by the splitting of the sea, it says there's a very strong wind. Why is there a very strong wind? If you want to deny, you could always deny. And we see that all around us. If you want to deny, person can always deny. And therefore the battle would have been attributed to incredible. It was the weather and the formation and the strategy and the this and the that, and this and the that. Therefore we had that miracle of the oil that happened along with it to make us know very clearly there is divine hashgacha, process as we call it, divine orchestration that is going on over here. Yes,
even more so, I think, because they didn't know that it was going to only be 8 days. And so the embrace I think, is even more impressive.
Yeah. And also with the alacrity. Hey, we have enough for one day. We'll go for one day, right? You know, we always say, mitzvah baliyadcha al tachmitzena. You have a chance to do a mitzvah, you go ahead and you do it. What will be tomorrow? I'm not sure. Dove and then Cheryl. Yeah.
Oh, you know what? If we're going to start, let's do it how Aperoda is going to do it in the quadrant.
Okay. Cheryl?
It just occurred to me that Aaron's sons, holy, amazing men, their lives were just drained out of them for not obeying and going into the Holy of Holies. And
talking about another Navi, okay.
So how did these evil people, get to do all what they did?
So you're asking Aaron's sons on the day of the consecration of the Mishkan, they went in a wanton fashion. Well, they went in with their own freestyle offering and they died. How could God allow these heathens to go in and do all of that? Yeah. So actually, there's a famous Gemara in the end of Makos where Rabbi Akiva is walking along with others and they see the destruction of the temple, right? And he says, right, and everyone else started to cry, and he started to laugh. They said, why? He said, why are you laughing? Why are you crying? Why are you crying? The place about which it was written that a non-Kohen can't enter, and now foxes are running there. How can we not cry? And he answered, well, the reason I'm laughing, I'm smiling because I see the ultimate redemption. But the idea is, how could foxes run through there, right? And we hear that Titus went there. We read on Tisha B'Av how he went in there and with a prostitute, right? So our understanding, the Gemara goes through this, and the Psukim support this based on the verses. There were 10 stages of the Shekhinah, the divine presence, leaving the temple. Once the divine presence, the Shekhinah, had left the temple, it was now a very ornate building, wood, gold, but it was bereft of its kedusha. When it has its kedusha, it has its kedusha. Once the Shekhinah left, actually the Zohar uses a term. I don't know the Zohar. I saw this in the Nefesh HaChaim. It says, "Kimcha tachun tachan." Flour that was already ground up. That's what they ground up. When they destroyed the temple, it was already destroyed. It was destroyed in a spiritual sense, and therefore, what could happen afterwards was not going to be an issue. Alan.
So if that's the case, why is it a problem for anybody to go on Har Habayit?
So the Har Habayit, right? We can do avoda. So we say that the kedusha rishona kitcha l'shaita v'kitcha l'ashilavo. The kedusha continues because of what was there. It's not going to have. That's a good point.
Say that all the kedusha left.
I said the Shekhinah left. Hashem's divine presence that was there left, and the degree of kedusha that comes along with that was no longer there. Yeah,
Rabbi?
But there is, yes.
Isn't it also a parallel to what Elijah did with the statues? because every time it looks like Hashem is going to be, or his people are going to be vanquished, Hashem himself shows up and allows the people who are telling the Jews to stop being Jews because your God is fake, do what we're doing. Hashem always has the last word. And so
Yes.
I see it also as sort of like, history rolls on and forward, but every time there is an opportunity for Jews to be vanquished, either completely or almost completely, Hashem shows up because it's part of the covenant. That's exactly the whole point, I think.
Right.
And I always
Right.
saw Hanukkah as like the what is it when Elijah has the statues and he calls down the fire and he says, "What, your gods are sleeping? Wake them up! Come on!"
Oh, the showdown Elijah had. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I hear that. I hear that. Okay, let's continue on. Yes, Jay.
Yeah, the book of Maccabees, right? Sefer Maccabim, right? So we know that it was written by non-Jews in Greek. But what's interesting is that it corroborates the fact that we celebrated for 8 days. It says that we feasted for 8 days.
Nice.
So it corroborates.
Nice.
Even though they don't mention the miracle, it corroborates the miracle.
Nice. Yes.
Also about what Alan suggested, if we go there, we so to speak admit what happens and admit this verdict. If we don't go there, like when we finish Rosh Chodesh on our side, if this is based on our side, we established the month. Here we also like, hey, Hashem did this way, but we are not accepting it, so we still.
So we want to be sure to
we want to
attribute.
get that.
Okay, I hear.
Instead of just admitting.
I hear. We don't admit defeat. Okay. In source number 6, Rav Shimshon Hirsch has a very, very powerful explanation that he gives and gives us what could have been, what should have been, what was meant to be, but how it got diverted and corrupted. In Bereshit, source number 6, the Torah says, Yaft Elokim liyefet v'yishkon ba'alei shem. This is after Noach, after the flood, and he's laying there naked, and the sons come in and they cover him, right? Shem and Yefet, those two sons. In Yefet come together reason and the desire for the spiritual. Yefet reaches its peak in the culture of Yavan, Greece, and until today these two remain, Yisroel and Yavan, representing Sinai and humanism respectively. Yefet beautified the world from an aesthetic point of view, while Shem enlightened the world from an ethical, moral perspective. Yefet prepares the ground for the mission of Shem. First, let a person be imbued with ideas of the beautiful and the good in the spirit of the Greeks. Afterwards, let him proceed to be imbued with that which is still more beautiful and elevated and harmonious, the godly. Meaning there's an appreciation for the beauty of the world, and then from that we can ascend to an appreciation and beauty of that which goes beyond this physical world. There was a conflict between two perspectives of life, two cultures, which until today are struggling for dominance in the world. The Greek nation stood at the pinnacle of culture, of all the descendants of Yefet. The Greeks taught to all the other nations the beautiful, and explained that which is beautiful is also good. However, at the pinnacle of the culture of the children of Shem stood Aver, whose descendants became the Hebrew nation, which plants its tents according to the will of Hashem. In order to sanctify his name, they build the temple of justice and love. Turning the page, friends. The mission of both cultures is to cover the animalistic nakedness in humankind. Both were destined to raise man to the level of the human and the godly, and to subdue by proper education the influence of Cham, the hot-blooded roughneck who desires the animalistic nakedness. All of the history of the world till our day represents the constant struggle between the above prophecy of Yaft Elokim liyefet, beauty given to Yefet, and it dwells in the tent of Shem. The culture, Shem, not Shem, S-H-A-M-E in English, Shem, as a son of Noah. The culture of Greece aroused the desire for logic and enlightenment, a feeling of yearning for great ideas, and the opening of the spiritual life of a person through the contemplation of harmonious and beautiful essences of things, and by means of the control of one's overwhelming desires. So did the culture of Greece develop a feeling of self-respect within man. It could arouse trust in oneself and give a person responsibility for the conduct of one's life. In short, the spirit of Greece freed man from the chains which bound him, enlightened him with culture, beautified his spirit, and filled him with the joy of life. The spirit of enlightenment which emanated from Greece in its pure form never constituted a danger to the holy ways of Israel, inasmuch as Israel sees it as a contributing cause to the realization of its own destiny, namely the enlightenment of man and his improvement. Then it was always proper to bring into his tent the truth and pure humanity associated with that spirit. And I think, this was written by Chanukah Horst in Germany, right? In the late 1800s, I think it was. I believe, I'm not sure, but well before the Holocaust. And what's frightening when we would think about it is when you have this idea of culture, of pure culture, without the spirituality. So in Germany was the most cultured country of the world, of Europe. And Europe was, right? That was culture with the opera and the symphonies and art. And it was, most of the Nazi top people had their doctorates, right? And in the universities, it was the professors, right? As we see today, in many universities leading the charge against Israel. It is the professors who were. I remember going years ago. I went with Harvey Karp, Alav Shalom, and Blossom Siegel. I went to a CUFI conference in Washington. CUFI is Christians United for Israel. There's a Pastor Hagee who gave a Mussar shmooze from the lectern there that I couldn't get away saying it over here in Beth Jacob. It was just too much in everyone's face. It was just too strong, too stark. Here I have to walk around a little bit sometimes, right? It was amazing. But Dennis Prager, he should be well, was one of the speakers there, and he said that it used to be that our greatest enemy was the Christian world, and our greatest ally was academia, was the universities. And now it's split, he said. And Christians have become our best friends, and academia, the universities, have become such a force against us. But you see with Nazi Germany what can happen when you have just the Yefet without the tense of the son of Noach, of Shem. And that's what happens. You can take all that culture and turn it into the craziest killing machine. But to do it very, very organized in a very, very structured way. One of the things that really struck me years ago, we did a Beth Jacob Poland Israel trip, and going to the death camp there. And the strangest thing, there was a pool of water about like 3 feet deep, and maybe it was 6 feet by 8 feet. Why was that there? Well, in order to get insurance for these death camps, right, against fire, it was hard to get insurance against fire because you had crematoriums working over there, right? So in order for the German insurance companies to properly insure these properties against fire, there need to be these pools of water around to put out any fire. I mean, you knock your head against the wall and say like, right? This is lunacy. This is yeah. Okay. Yes. I heard recently that he was somewhat on the mend. Yeah.
What happened?
He had, I think, he had a stroke, I think, right?
He fell and
He fell.
injured his
Yeah.
spinal cord.
Okay, and I think that this feeds into our last two sources over here. Number 7, the Breshit Rabbah. This is one of the Medrashim that we have. Lakish Patar Karya Begalid Va'eretz Haita Tohu. He explained the verse, and the earth, one of the first psukim of the Torah, right? Va'aretz Haisa Tohu Vavohu V'choshech Al Pnei Tahom. Tohu, Vohu, desolate, void, darkness on the face of the deep. And the Medrash explains that this is a reference to the 4 galiot, the 4 exiles that we would endure. And the Choshech, that is a reference to the Greek exile. And darkness, the Choshech, quote, and darkness refers to the Greek exile, which darkened the eyes of the Jews through its decrees. Let's understand what this means. There's a beautiful sefer called Sifsei Chaim, and he explains as follows. We'll go right to the English. This time period is called the Greek exile. As I mentioned earlier, the term exile does not only refer to time periods when the Jews were exiled from the land of Israel, as was the case. I just need the plug back, otherwise I'm going to die over here. Over here.
Sorry.
No problem.
My bad.
No problem. As was the case with the Babylonian exile. Right? We speak of the 70-year Babylonian exile. That is when we were with the destruction of, when the Babylonians destroyed the first temple, and we were sent out into exile. That's the classic exile that we're familiar with, right? However, exile is mainly the removal of the holy presence, Shekhinah, occurring when the spiritual connection between God and the Jewish people is weakened or disconnected. This comes about in situations where non-Jews rule over the Jews spiritually, and the Jews are influenced by their culture and behave according to the ways of the nations. There is a very classic Ramban who explains that each of the 5 books of the Torah has its own theme. And he says that the book of Shemot is the book, Exodus is the book of exile and redemption. And that's why, even though it was towards the end of Bereshit, Genesis, where we read about Yaakov going down to Egypt with all of his sons, Yosef is there already, the book of Shemot begins again. And these are the names of Bnei Yisroel who went down to the land of Egypt. Why? Because it's not simply a history book picking up where the last chapter left off, but this is the book of exile and redemption. So we need to start with the very beginning of exile. So what is the redemption? Geula, Galut, Geula, exile, redemption. What is the redemption that it concludes with? You'd say Exodus from Egypt. No, that's in the middle. You'd say Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Sinai. Nope, that's in the middle. You'd say entering Israel. That's not until the book of Joshua, after all 5 books. So what is the redemption? That is the conclusion of this book of exile and redemption. The very last paragraph of the book of Shemot is upon the building of the Mishkan, of the sanctuary, the Mishkan, the tabernacle. I don't know what that means, but sending is phylacteries. Yeah, the building of the Mishkan. So what happens? God's presence fills the Mishkan. That is redemption. When we are, and that was outside of Israel, when we are connected like that to God, that is redemption. When we have this disconnect, then we have exile. Defining the second paragraph there, defining Yavan, Greece, as darkness, opposes what is accepted in the world and what is known from the history of the Greeks, since the blossoming of enlightened human civilization was rooted in Greece. the development of philosophy, science, culture, and their dissemination from the Romans to the great empires that followed, including the Arab nations, all found themselves on the wisdom of the Greeks. It remains the basis of culture and science today. Yet, the sages determined that this worldview is darkness. This is the reason for Yavin being coined darkness. Since the Greeks were so scholarly, it was their intention to compete with the Torah's wisdom and with the Torah nation. They wanted to replace, they wanted to usurp. This is knowledge. This is importance. The Maharal explains the Greeks wanted to destroy the special relationship of the Jews to the Torah, right? The special link between us, the Jewish people, and God is something that they wanted to destroy. According to the principle that a strong nation is jealous of another strong nation, and therefore wanted to dispossess them of their Torah. In fact, since the Greeks were wiser than other cultures, they specifically viewed the Jewish nation as a threat to their stature. And again, we saw this again during World War II, that Hitler, Yamach Shemo, saw this as a battle of the Germans against the Jews. And that's why he diverted resources that were needed for the war effort. It was diverted to gathering the Jews for his planned annihilation and somewhat successful genocide that he perpetrated. Right? That is, a nation is jealous of another strong nation, and understanding that, again, with Hitler, that there are these competing world views. In fact, their goal was to translate the Torah into Greek and to transform Judaism into a subculture of Greece that we mentioned last week. The Septuagint was the translation of the Torah into Greek, right? Have it. You can have these things. Have an ancient book. Have a beautiful building. Have all of these trappings of Judaism, but let it just be a very nice cultural Judaism. And that is shfichat dam. Not in the term that's normally mean as murder, but it is the spilling out of the blood, taking away the life blood. And therefore, as we discussed last week and started again this week, if every holiday, if this became a rabbinic holiday, that means that the sages understood, as we saw before, the next year they established it. B'nei Vina Yemei Shmona Kavu Shir, or none will sing next week in Amos Sur. B'nei Vina, those with understanding, established this as the holiday, because that same spiritual energy, that same potential that was maximized, actualized then, it comes back every year. And that is why we have the Chanukah. To me, it's such a beautiful contrast. You have all these blaring, flashing lights, and then you have our small, penetrating, steady light, right? And that is our focus. And to find the fire within us when it comes to our prayers, our davening, to find the meaning and find the passion, and to make sure that we are being passionate with that which we do. And that comes, I think, through taking time to understand things on a deeper level, and also taking the time not to just check the boxes, but take the time to make things, to see what we're saying. You know, I suggested to my Jewish Journeys class, or to some people I was talking to, about having the transliterated Siddur, right? Besides the fact that it's transliterated, so it puts those who have problems reading Hebrew, but it gives you the definition of the words right underneath it, right? And you know, the article siddur that we have is a great siddur, but if you want to check what a word means, to find it on the other side of the page is kind of difficult. When you have it right underneath there, or right aligned with it, right? So then interlinear, yeah. So it helps you, all right? It helps me. think it helps all of us to take the time to make sure that we invest the life spirit. Yes, and
What
then
would
Janet.
be the relationship between the dreidel and the menorah lights and the spinning of that?
Yeah. So the dreidel. So there are those that say the accepted idea is that this was a game that the children would play when Torah was prohibited to study Torah. So they would go to study Torah. They would have like this was the soccer ball of the time. That if any of the Greek Assyrians would come to check what they're doing, they would just playing the game, right? There are others that say that that's the standard, right? There are others that say that this is just a game that we kind of incorporated, right? On the dreidel we have the letters Nun, Gimel, Hey, and outside of Israel Shin, and in Israel Pei, which stands for Nes Gadol Haya. A great miracle was either there in Israel, or if you're in Israel, Haya Po was here. Yeah. Yes, Janet.
Um, so on the second day, when it became apparent that this miracle was happening, does that mean that Shekhinah had re-entered the temple? I mean, how does that figure?
The Shekhinah re-enters with the purification of the temple, and that's what they did. Yeah.
So, but
I don't
what wasn't
I don't think the miracle is what brings the Shekhinah back. The miracle showed that Hashem is right there with us, right there with us. Just as an aside, so one of the probably the most famous question on Chanukah is, well, there was enough oil to burn for one day and burn for 8 days. So they had 7 days of miracle, right? And one day was just oil burning. So why do we have 8 days of Chanukah, right? And there are literally hundreds of answers that are given to this Beis Yosef's question, right? And the classic answers are along the lines that, well, one day is for the miracle of the battle, right? Or they put in only 1/8 of oil each day, and that managed to burn the full day. So it was an equal miracle, right, throughout. Right, lots of different answers. The answer that I like the most is that we have to. It's based on a Gemara in Tanis, which tells the story of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, who lived a very impoverished life, and his daughter one time said to him, "Oh, I mistakenly took the flask of vinegar, and I used that to fill the oil glasses for lighting Shabbos candles." Right. So presumably, when she poured that in, a little bit of oil went to the top, and that's what lit. But now it's already Shabbos, and it's going to soon go out. And he said to her, "You don't have to worry. The same God that tells oil to burn, he can tell the vinegar to burn." And the Gemara relates those candles burned the entire night, the whole day, and they used those to light for the Havdalah candle on Motzei Shabbos. And the answer that I like very much to Bezos's question is that we have to appreciate that oil burning one day is a gift from God, right? Nature is miracles that we've grown accustomed to. So Hanukkah is a time to shake us out of our doldrums and recognize what's going on around us and be fully appreciative. Yeah.
In a secular sense, that would Hanukkah be more of a commemoration to the freedom to worship?
Yeah.
And then,
yeah,
but to also remind the Jewish nation that Hashem is still with us. And
yeah. Hashem is with us, and to fight for our ability to live and act as Jews.
So really, it's a universal commemoration.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, Sharon.
So, just like in years before, today in Israel, the people who want to erase us have taken over the cave of Machpelah. Rachel's tomb is in their borders, Shechem, where Yosef is buried, where the Holy Temple was, a mosque is on top of it. They are trying to erase us.
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
whole world is in collusion and agreement with that.
I don't know the whole world, but many are. Yeah.
And Jewish people don't even see this.
Yeah. Look, I always say we need to be proud and strong and knowledgeable over who we are and what we're about.
So you said there's like 8 stages of Shekhinah. Hashem.
10. The Gemara goes through.
So upon rededication, did all 10 come back, or was it
Yeah,
also
that's what it
stages of
seems.
returning?
I'm not sure.
I mean,
But
'cause it's,
the end was yes. The end was yes. All 10 were back. Did it happen in stages, or did it happen all in one? I like to imagine it was all in one. Right? It's when Hashem's leaving, so then it is more of a stutter step, like right? Stop doing what you're doing, and I'll stop leaving. When it's time to come back, then it is full steam ahead. Okay, my friends, I'm going to be away for a few weeks, so we will resume. You'll see the emails. We will resume in January with our Lunch and Learn programs. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining.